The command center was not a place where people normally paused to notice a single individual. It was built for urgency. Screens glowed with satellite feeds, maps of foreign terrain pulsed with digital markers, and voices usually carried in clipped tones of authority. Yet on this day, the steady hum of work broke into silence as the heavy steel doors opened and the general walked in. General Richard Halvorsen was not a man easily ignored. His presence carried decades of authority, hardened by years of commanding squadrons in both training and combat. His medals told stories of wars fought in shadows and skies. But he wasn't here to command a mission. He was here for something much smaller, and in a way, much larger. Word had reached him about a pilot. Not just any pilot someone whispered about in briefing halls, spoken of by both rookies and veterans alike. The stories contradicted each other. Some said she was reckless. Others swore she was the calmest voice you could hear over a radio when everything went to hell. But all agreed on one thing. She had become unforgettable. His eyes swept the room as he entered. Officers straightened, technicians froze mid-keystroke, and conversations died. His boots echoed against the polished concrete floor, each step measured, deliberate. He gave a nod to the colonel standing nearby, then glanced past the line of personnel until his gaze fell upon a figure at the back of the room. She didn't stand out at first glance. Her hair was neatly tied. Her flight jacket bore the ordinary creases of someone who had spent too many hours in a cockpit, and her boots carried the dust of places most people would never see. She wasn't trying to draw attention. In fact, she looked as though she preferred the shadows. Yet that was exactly what made her presence impossible to ignore. Lieutenant Maria Dawson stood quietly, hands folded behind her back. She didn't flinch as the general's gaze lingered. Her eyes, steady and sharp, met his without arrogance or hesitation. She looked like someone who had faced storms before, and perhaps learned to fly through them. The general halted, the silence in the room thick enough to be felt. He didn't ask for her service record. He didn't list her missions or acknowledge the rumors. He asked for one thing, the only thing that mattered among aviators, the single word that revealed who you truly were in the skies. "Lieutenant," his voice carried, firm and commanding. "What's your call sign?" The question struck the room like a thunderclap. Every officer turned toward her. In the Air Force, a call sign wasn't a nickname. It was identity. It was history. It was reputation carved into syllables. Call signs were earned through the kind of moments that no one forgot, moments where courage, skill, and sometimes foolish luck defined a pilot forever. To have a call sign was to be recognized by the brotherhood and sisterhood of the skies. Maria Dawson had flown dozens of missions, some whispered about in barrooms, others etched quietly into after-action reports. And yet, most of the people in this room had never heard her voice declare her identity. They had heard stories, seen glimpses, but not the moment itself. Now it had arrived. She took a single step forward. Her boots struck the floor lightly, her posture unwavering. Her eyes swept across the room, not in defiance, but in acknowledgement of the weight of what was being asked. The silence deepened, until even the hum of the machines seemed to vanish. For a heartbeat, the air hung heavy with possibility. What would she say? Would she claim something too bold, too unearned? Would she falter under the general's piercing stare? Instead, her voice rang out steady, even carrying across the room without need of amplification. Specter 6. The two words cut through the air with a sharpness that silenced even the restless shuffling of boots. The moment was electric. Officers exchanged glances, but said nothing. The name itself seemed to ripple through the air, heavy with meaning. Specter. A ghost. Silent, unseen, yet deadly precise. 6. A position, a role, a designation in formation that carried both risk and responsibility. Together, the call sign carried weight, the kind that wasn't self-proclaimed, but forged in the crucible of combat. The general studied her for a long moment, as if measuring the truth in her words. He didn't question it. He didn't need to. He had heard the stories. Now he understood why they carried such gravity. The silence in the room was not from doubt, it was from respect. For the others in the room, the call sign was more than a name. It was a story told without words. Those who knew of the mission that had birthed it felt a chill, recalling the night when her gunship had descended like a phantom over enemy territory, shielding soldiers trapped below. Those who didn't know sensed the weight of history behind it, the kind of weight that only came from having looked death in the eye and flown straight through it. Maria didn't smile, didn't flinch, didn't waver. She spoke her name as if it were fact, because it was. The general finally gave a slow nod. His eyes soft, not with warmth, but with recognition. In that nod was acknowledgement, not only of her skill, but of the silence she commanded without effort. He didn't need to say another word. The moment had already etched itself into memory. Around them, officers shifted uneasily, some hiding their awe behind composed expressions. Others, younger and less practiced in masking emotion, couldn't hide the glimmer in their eyes. They had witnessed something they would retell for years to come, the moment when a call sign was spoken into existence, not as a boast, but as a truth so undeniable that it silenced a room full of seasoned soldiers. The general turned, his boots striking the floor once more as he made his way toward the exit. Yet the silence lingered, thick and reverent, even after the doors closed behind him. And at the center of it all, Maria Dawson stood as she always had, calm, steady, unmoved by the whispers or the weight of eyes upon her. She was Specter 6 now, not because she claimed it, but because the room itself, the silence itself, had accepted it. The command center slowly returned to motion. Voices resumed, fingers tapped across keyboards, and maps flickered with data once more. But something fundamental had shifted. Everyone present knew they had witnessed a moment of history, though perhaps not the kind recorded in official logs. It was the kind passed down in hushed tones, carried in stories, remembered in the way silence can say more than words ever could. And so can the hum of machinery and the echo of boots long gone, a legend settled quietly into place. Specter 6 had spoken, and the world had listened. Maria Dawson had never been ordinary, though she had grown up in an ordinary-looking house on the quiet edges of San Antonio, Texas. To the neighbors, she was the quiet girl who spent more time watching planes slice through the skies than playing with dolls. To her family, she was the daughter of a man who carried the ghosts of a war fought decades earlier, a Vietnam veteran whose voice softened only when he spoke about flying. Her father, Sergeant Michael Dawson, never bragged about his service. He didn't have to. The scars in his silence told enough. Some nights, Maria would find him out on the porch, staring at the horizon as if waiting for something that would never come back. When she was young, she would climb into his lap and ask him what it was like to fly. He would never tell her the stories of fear or loss, but instead the sensation of freedom, the feeling of being above the chaos, of watching the world shrink into a map beneath your wings. That, more than anything, lit the fire inside her. At school, her classmates were interested in movies, dances, and weekend games. Maria was interested in lift, drag, and thrust. She checked out books on aviation, memorized technical diagrams, and sketched aircraft on the back of her math homework. Teachers noticed she wasn't just curious, she was obsessed. When a local air show came through, she dragged her father along, her eyes glued to the fighter jets that screamed overhead with a thunder that rattled her chest. While other kids cheered, Maria stood still, transfixed. "This is where I belong," she whispered to herself. Her father heard it, and though he carried doubts, not because he didn't believe in her, but because he knew the weight of the path she was choosing, he never told her to stop dreaming. Instead, he encouraged discipline. If you want to fly, he'd say, you can't just dream. You have to outwork everyone else. In the sky, excuses don't keep you alive. Maria took those words seriously. By the time she reached high school, she wasn't just a good student. She was relentless. She joined JROTC, ran track to build endurance, and pushed herself academically in math and physics. While her peers wondered what college might offer them, Maria had her eyes set on only one place, the United States Air Force Academy. Getting in was no small feat. The academy didn't just ask for grades. It asked for leaders. It asked for young men and women willing to be molded under pressure until only the unbreakable remained. Maria applied with every ounce of determination she had, knowing full well that acceptance was rare. When the letter finally came, she sat on the porch with her father. His weathered hands trembled slightly as she tore it open. The words inside confirmed it. She had been chosen. She was going to Colorado Springs. She was going to chase the sky. The academy was everything she expected and worse. Days began before dawn with physical training, so grueling that even the strongest cadets collapsed. Classes were unforgiving, crammed with engineering, aerodynamics, and endless technical detail. Discipline was enforced to the second. Mistakes weren't corrected with scolding, but with consequences. And then there was the doubt. Not her own. That would come later, but from others. Some cadets whispered that she'd been accepted because she was female, that quotas mattered more than merit. Others said she wouldn't last, that she'd eventually crack under the pressure. Maria heard the whispers, felt the sidelong glances, and understood the truth. She would have to be twice as good just to be seen as equal. But she didn't argue. She didn't shout. She simply worked. When others studied for an hour, she studied for 2. When others rested after training, she ran laps in the dark until her legs ached. She pushed her body until it screamed, then pushed her mind until it was silent again. Slowly, steadily, she began to climb ranks not through favoritism, but through undeniable performance. Her professors noticed her sharpness in technical subjects. Her flight instructors noticed something rarer: calmness under stress. While other cadets panicked in the cockpit, Maria's voice stayed even, her movements precise. She didn't fly with bravado. She flew with intent. The moment that sealed her reputation came during her 3rd year, in a training exercise designed to simulate combat pressure. Cadets were paired into teams for a mock dogfight in simulators. The goal was to outmaneuver and destroy the opponent using tactics. Maria's opponent was a cadet who had already built a reputation as one of the best in the class, a brash and confident flyer. The instructors expected him to crush her quickly. Instead, she read his movements like a book. Calmly, with surgical precision, she baited him into overcommitting, then swung behind him and fired. The simulator lit up. Target destroyed. The room went quiet. The brash cadet removed his headset in disbelief. The instructor raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Maria didn't smile. She simply logged her results, as if it were just another exercise. But from that moment on, the whispers about quotas started to fade. By the time she graduated from the academy, Maria Dawson wasn't just another cadet. She was top of her class in tactical flight, a leader respected for her quiet authority, and a pilot who had proven she could outfly nearly anyone. Her father attended the ceremony, his chest swelling with pride as she walked across the stage in her dress blues. He didn't cry, though his eyes shone when she saluted him afterward. "You did it," he said softly. Maria shook her head. "Not yet, Dad. This is just the beginning." And she was right. Her assignment brought her into one of the Air Force's most demanding communities, the gunship squadrons, where flying wasn't just about skill, it was about precision under fire, about making decisions in seconds that determined whether soldiers lived or died. The AC-130 was not a glamorous fighter jet. It was a massive, lumbering gunship bristling with weapons, a plane that stayed in the air long after others left, circling in the darkness to provide cover for those on the ground. It wasn't the kind of assignment most pilots dreamed about. But for Maria, it was exactly where she belonged. Here, in the skies above hostile ground, her calmness became her greatest weapon. Her crew began to notice. Under fire, while others might snap or shout, her voice was level, steady, reassuring. To the soldiers below, that voice was sometimes the only thread of order in the chaos. And slowly, as the missions stacked up, something else began to build. A reputation. A reputation that would eventually travel up the chain of command, reaching generals and commanders who heard whispers of a pilot who never lost her call, who flew like a ghost through the most dangerous skies. The girl from Texas had become more than her childhood dream. She was becoming a legend in the making. But legends, like call signs, are not given freely. They are forged in the crucible of one unforgettable moment, a moment that Maria Dawson had not yet faced, but soon would. The world didn't know it yet, but Specter 6 was about to be born. The first time Lieutenant Maria Dawson walked into her squadron's hangar, the air smelled of fuel, grease, and steel. The AC-130 gunship loomed above her like a titan, its wings stretching wide, its weapons bristling along its flanks. To most newcomers, the sight was intimidating. To Maria, it was exhilarating. This wasn't just a plane. It was a responsibility, a machine built not for show, but for survival, carrying the weight of lives on the ground. But exhilaration did not make the transition easy. From the beginning, the squadron was merciless. Training flights were long and punishing, often stretching into the early hours of the morning. Crews drilled endlessly, repeating scenarios until muscle memory replaced thought. Every second counted. Every hesitation was the difference between saving lives and losing them. Maria, though already tested at the academy, quickly realized that this was different. Here, the stakes were not theoretical. Here, every exercise mirrored the chaos of war. The first weeks felt like an unrelenting storm. Simulator sessions piled one after another, designed to overload even the sharpest minds. Radios crackled with overlapping voices, radar screens flooded with signals, and instructors barked orders designed to rattle nerves. More than once, Maria left the cockpit drenched in sweat, her heart pounding as if she had just walked away from combat. It wasn't just the pace of training that pressed on her shoulders. It was the whispers. Even before she arrived, the squadron had already formed opinions. Some welcomed her presence with cautious neutrality, willing to give her a chance. Others saw her as an outsider, someone who had slipped in under the banner of diversity quotas. It didn't matter that she had graduated at the top of her class, or that her instructors had praised her calm precision. Here, in this world, reputations started over from zero. One evening, while reviewing flight data in the briefing room, she overheard two crew members talking in low voices. "She won't last long," one muttered. "Academy stars always burn out when the real work starts." "Especially her," the other said. "She doesn't have the edge. Not cut for this life." Maria didn't react. She closed her notebook, gathered her things, and left quietly. Their words stung, but she had learned long ago not to waste energy on argument. In this world, the only rebuttal that mattered was performance. And so, she doubled down. When others left after mandatory drills, Maria stayed, running simulations alone until the technicians kicked her out for the night. She studied maps and terrain data until her eyes burned. She memorized not only her role as a pilot, but also the intricacies of every crew member's job on the gunship. She believed that to lead effectively in the sky, she had to understand the pressure each voice on the radio carried. Still, the pressure mounted. During one early live exercise, her crew was tasked with providing cover for a mock ground unit under fire. The scenario was chaos. Alarms blaring, flares streaking across the dark sky, simulated enemy fire locking onto the gunship. Maria's hands tightened on the controls as her co-pilot shouted headings. For a brief moment, her vision tunneled. The weight of responsibility threatened to crush her, and a single misstep sent their flight path spiraling wide of its mark. The instructor's voice boomed over the radio. "Dawson, you just got your ground team killed." Her chest burned with shame. When they landed, she sat in silence as the debrief tore apart every decision she had made. Mistakes were circled in red on the screen, every hesitation magnified for all to see. She left the room that night with the weight of failure pressing hard against her. For the first time since arriving, she questioned herself. In the barracks, staring at the ceiling in the dark, Maria thought about the whispers. Maybe they had been right. Maybe she wasn't cut out for this. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Excuses don't keep you alive. She clenched her fists, pushing back the tide of doubt. The next day, she returned to the simulator with renewed focus. She began dissecting her mistakes, piece by piece, not avoiding them, but studying them. Every hesitation, every wide turn, every late call, she broke them down until she understood not just what went wrong, but why. She requested extra time with instructors, not caring if it made her look desperate. She studied the gunship's technical manuals until she could recall every system blindfolded. Slowly, her confidence rebuilt itself, not from arrogance, but from preparation. Weeks passed, and the cracks began to show not in her, but in her doubters. During another exercise, her crew faced a near-identical scenario to the one she had failed. This time, when alarms blared and voices shouted, Maria's focus sharpened. Her voice was calm, clipped, deliberate. Adjust bearing 320. Fire control, engage now. Every command was clear. Every maneuver precise. The ground team in the simulation reported minimal casualties. The instructor paused at the end, then nodded once. "That," he said, "is how you fly." It wasn't praise shouted from the rooftops. But in the world Maria lived in, it was monumental. Her crew began to notice, too. The same officers who had once doubted her began leaning forward during her briefings, listening more closely. They realized her calmness wasn't an act, it was who she was. Under pressure, she became sharper, steadier. Where others cracked, she centered. Yet, the whispers didn't vanish overnight. Some still held doubts, chalking her successes up to luck. Maria didn't try to convince them otherwise. She simply kept showing up, flight after flight, proving herself in the only language that mattered, results. The turning point came during a nighttime navigation exercise over the desert. Halfway through, an unexpected sandstorm swept across the range. Visibility dropped to near zero, instruments flickered with static, and panic rippled through the crew. For a brief moment, the instructor considered aborting. But Maria's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Maintain formation. Trust your instruments. Adjust pitch, steady at 2,000 feet. Her commands were calm, precise, unshaken. The crew followed, and against the storm's fury, the gunship held its course. When they landed hours later, exhausted and drained, the crew realized something had shifted. They hadn't just survived an exercise. They had survived because of her. The whispers in the hangar quieted after that. Not completely. Doubt never vanished in such places, but enough. Enough that Maria no longer walked as an outsider. She was still tested, still pushed, But now there was a grudging respect behind the eyes that watched her. Maria Dawson had not silenced her critics with words. She had silenced them with precision, discipline, and resilience. And though she didn't know it yet, the struggles of training were only preparing her for the mission that would define her forever. Because legends are not made in training rooms. They are made in the skies, when the difference between life and death rests on a single decision. And for Maria, that moment was coming. Among pilots, there were many traditions. Some were formal, etched into manuals and reinforced through ceremonies. Others were unspoken, passed down through stories told in hangars and bars after long flights. But none carried the same weight. None shaped a pilot's identity more than the call sign. Call signs were not names you chose. They were names you earned. Every squadron carried its own rituals, but the essence was always the same. A call sign was a story compressed into a word or phrase. Sometimes it was ironic, mocking a mistake that became unforgettable. Sometimes it was a mark of respect, acknowledging a pilot's defining trait. Either way, once given, it stuck. It became the way you were known, not only in the cockpit, but across bases, missions, even careers. Pilots joked that call signs lived longer than careers, because when a legend traveled, it was usually the call sign, not the birth name, that people remembered. Maria Dawson knew this. She had grown up listening to her father talk about fellow soldiers and pilots, names that sounded larger than life: Ghost, Viper, Outlaw, Falcon. He never explained how they got them, but he always said the same thing: you don't pick it. It picks you. Now, standing as a lieutenant in her own squadron, Maria felt the tension of that truth pressing against her. She had none. The other pilots around her wore their call signs like armor. Slider was a veteran co-pilot who had once skidded a landing so rough that the name stuck forever. Magnet had a habit of drawing enemy fire wherever he went, though somehow he always came out alive. Havoc was known for aggressive flying that sometimes terrified even his own crew. Maria was just Dawson. At first, she didn't mind. She knew enough to understand that call signs couldn't be forced. But as time passed, the absence became heavier. In briefings, names were called out quickly, and she was the odd one out, her surname standing there, without the cloak of identity that the others carried. In the barracks, she would hear stories of missions where call signs echoed like characters in a legend, and she felt like a ghost, present but not truly part of the fabric. Her crew noticed, too. "Don't worry, Dawson," one of them joked one evening. "Your time's coming. Might be tomorrow, might be a year, but it'll come. Just hope it's not something embarrassing." They all laughed, but Maria only smiled faintly. She knew the truth behind the humor. Call signs had power. To wear one meant belonging. To lack one meant you were still in limbo, still untested in the only way that mattered. It wasn't that she hadn't flown. She had. Training had toughened her, and she had begun logging missions overseas, supporting ground forces in hostile environments. But somehow, nothing yet had crystallized into that one defining story. Then came the squadron's unofficial ritual. Every few months, they gathered after a cycle of missions for what they called a naming night. It wasn't formal, not sanctioned by commanders, but everyone knew it mattered. Pilots, crews, and officers crowded into a bar just off base. Drinks flowed, laughter filled the air, and at some point in the evening, new members were put on the spot. The squadron voted, argued, and laughed until the name stuck. Maria dreaded it and anticipated it in equal measure. On her first naming night, she was dragged into the center of the room, her cheeks warming under the drunken cheers. The stories began flying. "Call her Tex. She's from Texas." Someone shouted. "Boring," another replied. "Half the Air Force is from Texas. How about bookworm? Girl spends more time with manuals than people. There was laughter. Maria forced a smile but said nothing. The names felt empty, shallow. They didn't fit. She could feel it in her bones. She wasn't Tex. She wasn't bookworm. She wasn't ready yet. And so, that night ended without a name. Some teased her for it. Others shrugged. But deep down, she felt the truth. Her call sign hadn't come because her defining moment hadn't come. Still, the absence weighed heavier as time went on. One evening in the hangar, her co-pilot leaned against the fuselage of their AC-130 and said, "You know, Dawson, they're waiting for you. That's why no name sticks. Everyone's holding back, waiting for you to do something that can't be ignored. Something good or bad?" She asked. "Doesn't matter," he grinned. "That's the beauty of it." Maria chuckled softly, but inside she understood. A call sign wasn't about desire. It was about truth. And truth only revealed itself when tested. So she waited. She trained. She flew. Mission after mission came, some routine, some tense, but none quite the crucible that forged legends. She supported ground troops under fire, delivered cover when others faltered, and began to build quiet respect among her peers. Yet still, she was just Dawson. The weight of expectation grew. One night in the squadron's ready room, a group of younger pilots debated call signs. Maria overheard them, sitting silently in the corner. "You know what's crazy?" One said. "I think when Dawson gets hers, it's going to stick hard. Feels like we're all just waiting for it." "Yeah," another replied. "It won't be something stupid. It'll be heavy. You can just tell." Maria didn't look up. She kept her eyes on her notebook, but her heart tightened. They were right. And it scared her, because it meant her test would not be small. Weeks passed, and the tension built like static before a storm. Her father called during one rare break between missions. His voice was gravelly, tinged with the weight of years. "How's it going up there?" She hesitated. "Good. Training's tough. Missions are tougher. Still don't have a call sign." He chuckled. "Neither did I, not for a long time. Mine came in a place I'd rather forget." "Be careful, Maria. A name can be earned in blood." His words lingered long after the call ended. She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what price she would pay when her moment came. And then it did. Not during a training exercise. Not during a barroom debate. But during a mission in the dead of night, thousands of miles from home, when soldiers on the ground were pinned and the sky was alive with fire. It was there, in the chaos and silence of war, that her name finally revealed itself. She didn't know it yet, but the legend of Specter 6 was about to be born. The desert was silent before the storm. From the cockpit of the AC-130 gunship, Maria Dawson watched the barren terrain roll beneath them, lit only by faint starlight and the occasional flicker of tracer rounds in the far distance. Her headset crackled with the chatter of ground units, clipped, urgent, frayed at the edges with panic. "Thunder 1 to Overwatch. We're pinned. Enemy fire from multiple rooftops, east and north. We're losing cover. We need air now." The call had come fast, urgent enough to scramble her crew in the middle of the night. They had been stationed at a forward operating base, barely an hour's rest between missions, when the distress beacon hit command. An infantry platoon was trapped in the narrow streets of a hostile city, ambushed by insurgents who knew the terrain like the lines of their palms. Maria's aircraft, call sign for the night, Overwatch 6, was their only chance. She steadied her breath, hands firm on the controls, as her co-pilot Mason ran through the final checks. "Systems green. Guns hot," he reported. Behind them, The crew manned the 40mm and 105mm cannons, waiting for orders. The AC-130, slow and lumbering compared to a fighter jet, was a predator built for these moments, circling silently in the sky, raining precision fire when boots on the ground were seconds away from disaster. Maria's eyes swept the infrared screens, the city glowing in ghostly white heat signatures. Figures darted across rooftops and alleys, insurgents moving like shadows with weapons raised toward the trapped U.S. soldiers. There, she pointed. Two groups, closing in fast on Thunder One's position. Mason cursed under his breath. They're boxed in tight. Not much room to strike without risking friendlies. Maria tightened her grip. The wrong angle, the wrong call, and she'd hit their own men. But hesitation could kill them faster. Her voice cut sharp into the headset. All stations, this is Overwatch 6. We have eyes on target. Hold tight, Thunder One, we're coming in. The infantry commander's voice was raw with desperation. Copy, Overwatch. We're low on ammo. If you don't clear those rooftops, we're done. Maria adjusted their orbit, the gunship banking smoothly into position. Her voice was calm, even though her pulse thundered in her ears. Targeting rooftop cluster, northeast. Fire control, you're cleared to engage. The first round roared from the 40mm cannon. A streak of light cut through the darkness, and in the next heartbeat, an enemy rooftop exploded in a bloom of fire. The crew whooped, adrenaline spilling into the comms. Direct hit. But there was no time to celebrate. The insurgents kept coming, regrouping like ants. Heat signatures flared on another rooftop. Machine gun fire lit up the street, where Thunder One's squad huddled behind crumbling walls. Second rooftop north. Mason shouted. Maria's jaw clenched. Bring the 105 online, now. The heavy cannon boomed, the recoil shuddering through the gunship. Below, a building vanished in a violent eruption, dust and fire swallowing the attackers. The radio crackled again. Overwatch, you're saving our asses down here. The ground commander shouted. Maria didn't respond. She couldn't afford to. Her eyes scanned the screens, tracking movement, reading the battle like a deadly puzzle. Every decision had to be perfect. Minutes stretched into eternity. Strike after strike, the AC-130 rained fire with surgical precision, peeling enemy forces off the trapped unit, one layer at a time. But the enemy wasn't giving up. They're regrouping east side, Mason warned. Bigger force, maybe 24. Maria narrowed her eyes. The infrared showed it clearly. A surge of fighters pouring out of an alley, moving fast toward the pinned soldiers. If they reached them, Thunder One wouldn't survive. This was the moment. Maria didn't hesitate. All guns concentrate fire. Sweep east to north. Clear a path for Thunder One. The airship thundered as both cannons unleashed. Explosions ripped through the alleyways in rapid succession, each shot placed with surgical precision. Enemy fighters scattered, some vanishing in the blasts, others fleeing into the dark. The street lit like daylight under the fury of the AC-130. Through the haze of dust and fire, Maria saw it, the path opening. The ground unit's heat signatures moved, breaking cover and sprinting through the cleared corridor. This is Thunder One. We're moving. You've got us a way out. Relief surged through the gunship crew. Mason exhaled hard, a shaky laugh breaking his usual composure. Hell of a night to be flying with you, Dawson. But Maria wasn't done. Her eyes caught one last cluster of enemies, regrouping farther north, preparing to fire RPGs toward the retreating soldiers. It was a last-ditch ambush, one that could still turn the mission into tragedy. Not tonight, she muttered. She shifted the orbit, lining up the shot herself. Her voice was steel through the comms. Engage last cluster, bearing 032. Take them out. The cannon roared. The street vanished in fire. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained but silence. The radio came alive with the voice of Thunder One's commander, ragged with gratitude. Overwatch 6, you just saved 30 men tonight. We owe you everything. Maria finally allowed herself a breath. Her hands trembled faintly on the controls, but her voice stayed steady as she replied, Copy, Thunder One, glad we could help. Safe travels home. The crew cheered behind her, slapping each other's shoulders, the adrenaline spilling into laughter and relief. But for Maria, the weight of the night pressed deeper. She had flown many missions before, but none like this. Tonight, she hadn't just flown. She had led. She had commanded the storm from the sky and carved survival out of certain death. When they landed back at base hours later, exhaustion settled into her bones. The crew shuffled out, still buzzing from the victory. But as she stepped off the ramp, something unusual happened. Silence. The ground crews, other pilots, officers, they were all there, watching. Word had already spread. The story of what her gunship had done, how close the infantry had come to annihilation, how perfectly she had held her nerve. One of the senior pilots stepped forward. Heard you made the desert ghosts tonight. Maria blinked, confused. Ghosts? He smiled faintly. The way you flew. Silent, deadly, unseen, until it was too late. Like a specter in the sky. That's what they're calling you already. Specter. The word settled into the air, heavy and undeniable. Behind her, Mason's grin widened. Yeah, that fits. But she wasn't alone. 6 crew, 6 lives in sync. Specter 6. The crowd murmured in agreement, voices rising, the name echoing like a seal pressed into history. Specter 6. Maria stood frozen, her heart pounding. For years she had waited, flying under the shadow of namelessness, wondering if her moment would ever come. And now, here it was. Not forced, not shallow, but born in fire and silence, etched by the respect of those who had seen what she could do. She gave a small nod, her lips barely curving into a smile. Specter 6, she said quietly, as if testing the weight of it. And the entire room fell silent, not because they doubted it, but because they knew, without question, that the name was already legend. The hangar smelled faintly of jet fuel and desert dust, the kind of scent that clung to uniforms and skin long after a mission ended. Rows of aircraft loomed in the background, their shadows stretching under the harsh fluorescent lights. Normally, the place hummed with noise, tools clanging, mechanics shouting, engines whining. Tonight, however, the air was different. Tonight, it was heavy with expectation. Maria Dawson stood near the front of the assembled squadron. Her posture straight, though her stomach churned. Word of her mission, the mission, had spread like wildfire through the base. By dawn, everyone knew. By noon, command knew. By evening, a general had flown in just to meet the crew of the AC-130. That had carved a path for 30 soldiers through the jaws of an ambush. It was not every day that a general requested to see you. Her crew stood beside her, lined up in crisp uniforms, fatigue hidden behind discipline. Mason, her co-pilot, had that sly grin that never seemed to leave his face, though tonight it carried a sharper pride. The gunners looked restless, shifting on their boots, whispering back and forth before snapping quiet when the commanding officer barked for silence. The hangar doors clanged open, and the general entered. General Reynolds was not a man who needed to announce himself. Broad-shouldered, his medals glinting against the neat lines of his uniform, he carried the kind of presence that filled the room before he even spoke. Behind him trailed several colonels and majors, their expressions serious, their eyes scanning the crew like hawks. "All right," Reynolds began, his voice a gravelly boom that cut through the air. "Which one of you is Dawson?" Every head turned toward Maria. She swallowed, stepped forward, and snapped a salute. "Lieutenant Maria Dawson, sir." The general's eyes studied her, sharp and measuring. For a long, tense moment, he said nothing. Then, with a slight tilt of his head, he asked, "I've heard stories. 30 men walked out of a death trap last night because of one gunship. That true?" "Yes, sir," Maria replied, her tone even though her chest tightened. It was a team effort. Every member of the crew played their part. Mason's grin widened, but he stayed silent, letting her speak. The general's gaze didn't waver. "Humility's good. But make no mistake, Lieutenant. They said it was your calm, your decisions, that kept that mission from turning into 30 folded flags. I don't hand out praise lightly. You've earned it." A murmur rippled through the squadron, pride and admiration surfacing among the ranks. Maria felt her face flush, but she kept her composure. Then the general's tone shifted, softer, almost curious. "Tell me, Lieutenant, what's your call sign?" The question landed like a strike. The entire hangar seemed to still. Mechanics froze in place. Pilots glanced at each other. Her crew stiffened, waiting. Maria's throat tightened. For years she had been just Dawson, nameless in the world where names mattered most. But last night had changed everything. She could still hear Mason's voice, the way he had said it so casually, so surely. Specter 6. She could still feel the silence that followed, the collective acknowledgement that something had been born in that moment. Now, in front of the general, she had to claim it. For a brief second, doubt flickered. Was it hers to claim? Or would speaking it aloud feel arrogant, premature? She inhaled, steadying herself. The mission had forged it. The squadron had spoken it. She had earned it. Her voice, when it came, was calm and steady. "Specter 6, sir." The words echoed across the hangar, sharp and clear. And then, silence. Not the silence of uncertainty. Not the silence of doubt. But the kind of silence that carried weight. Every pilot, every mechanic, every officer seemed to hold their breath, as though the name itself had drawn a line in history. Specter 6. The general's eyes narrowed, not in disapproval, but in thought. He let the silence linger, his gaze sweeping the crew, the squadron, the watching officers. Finally, he gave a single, firm nod. "Fitting," he said. Specter. The unseen, the silent, the deadly. And 6, for the crew that moves as one. That's a call sign worthy of respect. A ripple of agreement passed through the squadron, some murmuring the name under their breath, testing it the way Maria had the night before. Specter 6. It sounded heavier now, carried on the voices of dozens, reinforced by the presence of a general. Mason stepped forward, unable to restrain himself, his grin wide. "Told you it'd stick," he whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. Maria's lips twitched, but she kept her composure, snapping another salute. "Thank you, sir." The general returned the salute, his voice strong. "No, thank you, Specter 6. You and your crew saved lives. You've set a standard. And I expect to hear that call sign echoing in this Air Force long after tonight." The silence broke. Applause rose, first from her crew, then from the rest of the squadron, then from the entire hangar. The sound swelled, echoing against the metal walls, carrying with it pride, respect, and something deeper, acceptance. Maria stood at the center of it, her chest tight, her heart pounding, but her face composed. She had waited for this moment for years, through doubt, through training, through missions that felt invisible. Now, the invisibility was gone. She had a name. She had an identity. She had a place. As the noise roared around her, her father's words drifted back in memory. A name can be earned in blood. He had been right. But tonight, the blood spilled had not been theirs. It had been avoided, prevented, because of her choices, her calm, her leadership. The name had been forged not in loss, but in salvation. Later that night, after the ceremony faded and the hangar emptied, Maria found herself standing alone beside her aircraft. The desert wind blew softly, carrying sand across the tarmac. She laid a hand on the fuselage, the metal cool beneath her palm. "Specter 6, she whispered again, not to claim it, but to honor it. The name felt different now. It wasn't just hers. It belonged to the crew, to the men they had saved, to the silent circle of respect that had formed in the hangar. It was a name born in fire, carried in silence, and recognized in the presence of those who mattered most. For the first time in years, Maria Dawson didn't feel like she was waiting anymore. She was where she was meant to be. And in the quiet of the night, beneath the shadow of her gunship, she allowed herself the rarest of luxuries, a small, unguarded smile. The desert sun rose hard and bright the morning after the recognition ceremony, turning the horizon into a blaze of gold. For Maria, the night's silence and applause still echoed in her mind. But the Air Force allowed little time for reflection. By dawn, the engines roared again, schedules were posted, and another cycle of missions awaited. Yet something had shifted. When Maria walked into the briefing room that morning, she felt the change immediately. Pilots who once nodded politely now looked at her with something different. Not awe, not fear, but respect. Crews paused mid-conversation when she entered, then resumed in quieter tones. Even the youngest recruits straightened in their seats, eyes flicking toward her with a mix of curiosity and admiration. She didn't need to hear the whispers to know what they were saying. Specter 6, the call sign had traveled overnight, faster than she could have imagined. It wasn't just her crew who spoke it now. The squadron had claimed it. The wider base had picked it up. And within days, the story spread to nearby commands. She overheard fragments in hallways, murmurs over coffee. "That's her, Specter 6. They say she flew like a ghost. Precision fire in the dark. 30 lives, 30. All because she kept her head when no one else could." Maria carried herself as she always had, calm and professional. But inside, she felt the weight of expectation growing heavier. A call sign wasn't just a name. It was a banner. It meant you stood for something bigger than yourself. And now, she had to live up to it. Training sessions became different. Before, Maria had been just another pilot, skilled but unremarkable in the grand churn of operations. Now, younger flyers watched her with hawk-like intensity, studying every move, every word, as if they might catch the secret to her composure. One evening, during a simulator run, a nervous cadet froze mid-scenario, overwhelmed by the flood of alarms and hostile signals. The instructors barked at him, frustration bleeding into their voices. Maria, watching from the sidelines, stepped forward. "Pause the run," she said. The room went quiet. No one questioned her, not after the mission. She pulled the cadet aside, her tone calm, her eyes steady. "Listen, the noise, the chaos, it's meant to shake you. But the mission doesn't care about your panic. Your crew doesn't care about your panic. They need your calm. Control your breathing. Focus on the essentials. Everything else is distraction." The cadet swallowed hard, nodding. Maria clapped him on the shoulder, then told the instructors to restart. This time, the cadet steadied himself, survived the scenario, and when he exited, his eyes shone with relief. He whispered, almost reverently, "Thank you, Specter 6. Maria didn't reply, only nodded. But the words stayed with her. She realized then that the name had already begun to extend beyond her. It was becoming a lesson, a reminder whispered among recruits. Be like Specter 6. be calm in the storm. Among her peers, the shift was subtler but no less real. Some tested her, challenging her in small ways. A sharper tone in debates, a push during training, a skeptical look when she gave input. Maria never rose to the bait. She met each challenge with patience, logic, and the quiet steel of someone who didn't need to prove herself anymore. And slowly, even the skeptics softened. One evening in the squadron lounge, Mason leaned across the table with his usual grin. "You know what they're calling you now, right?" Maria raised an eyebrow. "Besides Specter 6? He chuckled. "The ice vein. Because they say you don't flinch. No matter the fire, no matter the chaos. Ice in your veins." She shook her head, hiding a faint smile. "That's not true. I just don't show it." "Exactly," Mason said, leaning back. "That's why it works." But legacy wasn't just about whispers and stories. It was also about trust. Weeks after the mission, another deployment order came. This time, Maria's crew was assigned to lead a joint operation with 2 newer gunship teams. In the planning room, tensions ran high. The new crews were green, anxious, and unsure of themselves. The mission parameters were brutal. Provide overwatch for a convoy moving through hostile mountain terrain, known for ambushes and hidden IEDs. 2 years ago, such a mission had ended in disaster when air cover faltered. The room carried that memory like a scar. Maria stood at the head of the table, maps spread before her, younger pilots glancing nervously in her direction. She spoke steadily, breaking the mission down step by step, stripping away the fear with clarity. "This isn't about glory," she said. "It's about patience, about precision. We don't rush. We don't guess. We cover them inch by inch until they're safe. That's all. That's everything." By the time the briefing ended, the green crews looked steadier. The mission went forward and ended with every convoy vehicle intact, not a single casualty. The credit spread quickly. It was Specter 6's leadership that made the difference. As months passed, Maria noticed the legacy forming in ways she hadn't expected. In the barracks, recruits traded stories of call signs they wanted. Invariably, someone mentioned hers. "Specter 6, they'd whisper. "That's the one. That's the standard." In training manuals, instructors began referencing her mission as a case study. They highlighted the decision-making, the composure, the teamwork. Cadets who had never met her studied her choices like scripture. Even the older veterans acknowledged it. One night, after a particularly grueling deployment, Maria was stopped by Slider, the crusty pilot who had once dismissed her as just another rookie. He handed her a drink, looked her in the eye, and said simply, "Hell of a legacy you're building, Specter. Don't waste it." But Maria didn't let it swell her pride unchecked. If anything, the weight grew heavier. With legacy came expectation. With expectation came responsibility. And with responsibility came fear, not of failure for herself, but of failing those who believed in her. She carried that fear quietly, using it not as a burden, but as fuel. Late at night, when the base was quiet and the desert stretched endless outside the gates, she would walk alone to the gunship. She'd lay her hand against its cool metal skin and whisper, "We keep them alive. That's our job. Nothing more. Nothing less." It wasn't about glory. It wasn't about a name. It was about lives. 30 soldiers that night. Dozens more in the weeks that followed. The recruits who steadied themselves because they believed in her story. The peers who found patience because she had shown it. That was the legacy of Specter 6, and she knew, deep in her bones, that it was only just beginning. History has a way of choosing its stories. Some vanish, forgotten in the tide of time. Others survive, carried forward not because of medals or speeches, but because they touch something deeper: courage, discipline, sacrifice. Specter 6 was one of those stories. It began as a whisper in one squadron. Then it became a name spoken in training rooms. And soon, it was no longer just Maria Dawson's call sign. It was a lesson, a standard, a reminder. Months after the desert mission, Maria sat quietly at the back of a lecture hall at the Air Force Academy, where she had once been just another cadet. Now she was there, not as a student, but as an example. At the front of the room, an instructor spoke with the energy of someone who knew his audience hung on every word. On the projector screen behind him, a grainy infrared image of a city at night flickered, the gunship footage from the mission. 30 soldiers were trapped here, the instructor said, pointing at a cluster of white heat signatures huddled in the corner of the screen. Insurgents surrounded them on every side. Ammunition was running dry. They had minutes, maybe seconds. And this is when Overwatch 6 entered the orbit. The cadets leaned forward, eyes wide. Some scribbled notes furiously. Others sat frozen, trying to imagine the chaos. The instructor pressed play. The screen lit up with arcs of fire, rooftops disappearing in flashes of light. "This," he said, his voice carrying weight, his precision under pressure. "This is calm when panic would have meant death. This is leadership in its purest form. And this," he paused, letting the silence stretch, "is why she became Specter 6. The cadets turned, almost in unison, toward the back row. Maria shifted in her seat, uncomfortable under the sudden attention. She hadn't come to be a spectacle. She had come to remind herself that stories lived beyond the people in them. The instructor smiled faintly. "Lieutenant Dawson is here with us today. If you're smart, you'll ask her what it means to carry a call sign like that." The room buzzed. Hands shot up. Questions came fast. How did you stay calm? What was going through your mind? Did you know it would become legendary? Maria answered simply, truthfully. "I wasn't calm inside," she admitted. "I was terrified of making the wrong call. But I remembered what my crew needed. Calm, clarity. So I gave them that, even if my own heart was racing. And no, I didn't know it would become a story. I just knew we had to save them." The cadets scribbled more, their expressions serious. Maria could see the fire in their eyes, the same fire she had once carried as a student. For the first time, she realized that her story was no longer her own. It belonged to the next generation now. Back on base, the influence grew in quieter ways. Recruits used her name during exercises. "Stay Specter 6, one would say to another when nerves began to crack. It became shorthand for composure, for discipline. Instructors referenced her mission as a standard of teamwork, not individual glory. They spoke not just of Maria, but of the way the entire crew functioned as one. Specter 6 had become more than a person. It was a symbol. Even in higher commands, the name surfaced. Generals referenced it during speeches about readiness. Reports cited it as proof of what training and discipline could achieve under pressure. Maria never sought the spotlight, but the spotlight found her. One evening, months later, she received a letter. It was not from command, not from a peer, but from one of the 30 soldiers her gunship had saved that night. The handwriting was rough, scrawled across lined paper. "Ma'am, I don't know how to say this. We were dead men. That's the truth. We were cornered, scared, and I was already writing my last thoughts in my notebook. Then your fire came. Every blast was like a hand pulling us out of the grave. I don't know how you did it, but you gave me a life I didn't think I'd have. Because of you, I got to go home, see my little girl again. She knows your name now. She calls you the Ghost Lady. Thank you doesn't cover it." Maria read the letter in silence, her chest tight, her throat burning. She folded it carefully, placed it in her locker, and sat quietly for a long time staring at the metal walls of the barracks. It wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about legacy. It was about that little girl who had her father because she and her crew had done their job. That was enough. That was everything. Time passed. New recruits cycled in. Older pilots rotated out. The rhythm of war and training never stopped. But the story of Specter 6 remained. In the squadron lounge, it became one of the origin tales told to new arrivals. Veterans would sit back with drinks, retelling the night, sometimes exaggerating the details, sometimes underselling them, but always circling back to the same point. She didn't flinch. She didn't fail. She saved them. Instructors at distant bases used her as a case study. When chaos comes, they would tell cadets, ask yourself, what would Specter 6 do? Her legacy grew not because she sought it, but because it was needed. The Air Force required symbols. Pilots required stories. And Maria's story fit that need. A reminder that one steady voice in the storm could mean the difference between life and death. Maria herself remained grounded. She still walked the flight line at night, still touched the cool metal of her gunship, still whispered the same vow, "We keep them alive." But she also understood now that her vow had grown larger. It wasn't just about the soldiers on the ground. It was about the cadets in classrooms, the recruits in simulators, the veterans at bars. It was about everyone who looked at her story and drew strength from it. She had become something she never expected, a living reminder that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to rise above it. Years later, long after the mission, long after her call sign had entered Air Force history, Maria Dawson's name appeared in training manuals, in speeches, in whispered encouragements among nervous recruits. But among those who knew her personally, who had flown with her, who had heard her voice steady over the radio while chaos raged below, she was always something simpler. She was Specter 6, not just a pilot, not just a legend, but a promise. A promise that in the darkest nights, when the world seemed lost, there would always be someone calm enough, steady enough, to light the way home. And that promise, that legacy, would live on long after Maria herself